The Great Wall of China was built more than 2,000 years ago. Chinese took them more than 300 years to build it. The wall so long, stretching more than 21,000 kilometers. So high no one can go over it, and so thick no one can go through it. With the most powerful defensive system, Chinese, they lost all their wars. Not because the enemy, they were able to break the wall or jump over it, but because the gatekeepers, the guards, they open the gates open for the enemy to enter because they receive some bribes, some money. Or the enemy, they identify which gate is not powerfully guarded and they attack the city. With the most powerful defensive system we have ever built, Chinese, they couldn't benefit from it because they decided to invest in the system of control. They decided to invest in the protection system rather than investing in the people who are guarding the city, rather than building the right culture. With the most powerful system, Chinese couldn't benefit from the system except in the fictional movie called The Great Wall. And this is what can happen inside your organizations. If you decide not to invest in the guards, in the management, in the employees, in your executives who are guarding your organization, who are making sure that corruption and fraud will not happen, and you just decide to go and implement controls and risk management and policy and procedures without going and investing in these individuals. At the end of the day, culture can eat strategy for breakfast. It's always about the right culture. Do you have the proper culture inside your organization to ensure that individuals are going to follow the policy and procedures, or that you don't? This is reality. What about all these bribes and corruption that are happening in the hidden doors? When I speak about bribery and corruption, I'm always speaking about what I call the hidden doors inside the organization. I'm sorry to tell you that I did that mistake. I decided to go and benefit from bribing some executives, from ensuring that I get that contract, from making sure that my organization will succeed. And I thought that I am doing this to benefit my employees. I am doing this so the shareholders will have more wealth. I'm doing this so my organization will be successful. I thought this is what everyone is doing in the industry. I thought this is how business is running. So what if I pay some executives here and some officials here to make sure that my contracts is actually working fine and I'm getting the business done? At the end, I'm not harming anyone. I'm not stealing. I'm not doing fraud, but I was completely wrong. Because I thought that for me, if I do these activities, it's not going to reflect bad on the economy. It's not going to come and hunt me back. I thought that it's okay for me to go and do all these schemes. But in reality, it's not never okay. They say wherever you do in fraud and corruption, it will come and hunt you back. It's going to come and bite you at the end. They say when we understand the concept of power, they say power doesn't usually corrupt, but people who corrupt the power. Do you remember the story of Julius Caesar? Julius Caesar, he was a very amazing political person because he understood that for him to be the highest powerful person in Rome, he had to do something. So he went and he said, I want to be the consul. I want to be the highest level. And when I'm going to be the consul, the highest level, I'm going to make sure that the individuals who voted for me, who elected me, I'm going to benefit them. So it was the biggest corruption scheme that ever happened in history. He told the two most powerful individuals in Rome, the guy who's handling the economy and the guy who's handling the military. He told them, listen, both of you, you are fighting to rule Rome. It's not going to work because if one will win, the other one will destroy him. So what you can do, both of you, you can elect me. I am independent. I will be able to run for your benefit. For the army, I will be able to allocate all the lands for your soldiers. And for you who is handling the economy, I will be able to create new regulations that will support your work. Now, when they gave him the power, when they make him a consul, and he started going and proposing all these regulations, so many members in the Roman Empire, they said, no, we don't agree on these rules and regulations. So what he decided to do, he decided to create fear. He started sending people from the street to hit all these senates. He told them, you will follow my rules or I will kill you. So everyone agree on his rules. And he was ruling in a powerful way. But after that, what happened? He introduced all these rules and regulations to these guys who are in the military. He introduced all these rules and regulations for the guys who are running the businesses. After that, both of them, they told him, listen, the next election, we are not going to elect you. Anyone in the parliament, they are not going to elect you. Anyone in the Senate, they are not going to elect you. You are going to leave because you are a corrupted person. He said, but I did this for you. I actually did all this corruption. I did all this manipulation, so you will benefit. They said, yes. And now we don't need you anymore. We already have our rules. We already have our regulations. So we want to remove you from power. So what he decided to do? He decided to go and leave the city and go fight with an army that he created. And he went and he conquered the world. After he conquered the world and after everyone heard how powerful he is, he decided to go back to Rome with his army. And he said, I'm going to take over Rome. But this time he understood that for me to do corruption, if I am in a position of power, I can do it by going and threatening the members, by going and bribing the officials. What I'm going to do, I'm going to change the rules and regulations and make myself an emperor. In the old days, there is no emperor. There's only a council, and there are senates who are working with them. But now he changed the rules and he made himself emperor. And now he got all the rules. But then he was afraid, what if he will die? What will happen to him and his family? So he changed the rule again and he makes himself emperor for life. And this what will happen inside the organization. This what will happen when someone is actually taking control, trying to create fraud and deception. But unfortunately, in so many parts of the world, corruption is happening on the highest level. It's happening on a government level. It's happening on an industry level. And this is where we need to understand how we need to fight corruption. Why United Nations say that corruption is a big issue and we need to understand it and fight it properly.
What is corruption? Corruption is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. It hurts everyone whose life, livelihood, or happiness depends on the integrity of people in a position of authority. Sometimes its devastating impact is more visible. A father without shoes because he has to pay to get his child into a free school. A small shop owner weekly bribing the local inspector and cutting his modest earnings. Other times, corruption's impact is less visible. The corporation securing a contract through big-hearted kickbacks to corrupt government officials. The lower safety standards buildings pass thanks to under-the-counter bribes, collapsing in an earthquake. To strengthen the fight against corruption, in 2003, countries in the United Nations concluded a convention against corruption. The UNCAC is the first global anti-corruption treaty and takes a comprehensive approach to tackling corruption worldwide. Ratified by 148 states by 2010, it includes obligations for governments to prevent and criminalize corruption and to cooperate internationally with other countries. The UNCAC is a major landmark, but only with constructive monitoring will governments take the UNCAC seriously. The countries that are party to the UNCAC adopted a review mechanism, the first ever peer review process in the United Nations system. The mechanism has three bodies which support the review process. All the states that are party to the UNCAC must be reviewed by peer review teams made up of experts from 2 reviewing countries. The review will x-ray domestic bribery, foreign bribery, embezzlement, money laundering, liability of companies, whistleblower protection, mutual legal assistance, and more. Civil society participation is a key element of a credible review process. CSO's role is to check government's progress in implementing the UNCAC, give suggestions for improvement, and provide support for governments to learn from good examples and to take similar actions. in this way can information be passed, in this way can information be shared by all, and only in this way can society at large determine how the country is faring in its fight against corruption and which are the areas that require additional attention.
So we always need to understand why actually corruption is happening. There is a very interesting study about dishonesty. And this study was testing us as a human, why we do things that we should not do. So the study was very interesting. They will give the students 20 questions and they will say, you will need to answer them. And then you are going to shred your answers. And then we are going to give you the correct answers. You will tell us how many you answered correctly. So in that way, we will not know if you are lying or telling the truth. But actually that machine was not shredding the answer. It was only shredding the side of the paper, but they can see exactly the answers. So they want to test the honesty of individuals. Are they gonna lie to get more money? So they discovered very interesting facts from the study that 80% of the delegates did the following. They answered 12 correctly. They say they answered 13 correctly. They answered 6 correctly. They say they answered 8 correctly. So they cheated only a little bit. And they were justifying that by saying, you know, it's okay. It's a small amount. It's insignificant. So what? And this is what all of us in the world maybe will do. 80% of the population will do a little bit corruption, not so much. But they discovered 10%, they didn't do any corruption. They were super honest. They answered 10, they said they answered 10. They answered 12, they say answered 12. But 10%, they were so corrupted. They answered 3 correctly, they say they answered 20 correctly. They answered 10 correctly, they say they answered 20 correctly. So these are the guys who are going to be around the world doing the massive corruption. If they are in the position of power, they are going to try to take advantage of it to the max. So what we need to do in that case in our organization, how we need to fight that? We need, when we are implementing any system, to be able 100% to catch these corrupted guys who are going to do massive corruption and fraud. But at the same time, we need not to catch these guys who are doing small corruption because that's going to be costly to us. We need to make sure that we change certain factors so they will not do corruption. And what are these factors? We call it the fraud triangle. Individuals, they are going to do corruption where there is an opportunity. If you don't have the proper controls and policy inside the organization. Individuals, they are going to do corruption where there is a pressure on them, where there is a motive for them to do it. And they are going to do it if they don't have the proper culture, the rationalization. If they believe what they are doing is okay, everyone is doing it inside the organization, so they can do it. Everyone is doing it in the government, so they can do it. If we can influence these 3 factors, we can at least reduce the fraud and corruption that happen by 80% of the population. We can implement strong controls to be able to catch the 10%, and we can motivate the 10% who are doing things correctly to stay. Because usually when corruption will happen inside the organization, the first thing, the guys who are not going to do corruption, they are going to run away. But we discover it's not only about these 3 factors. They discover based on the fraud diamond theory that it's all about the capability. The person who's going to do corruption is the person with power. The person who can do it and he can lie about it. He can deceive, he can hide. He got the brain to be able to do it where nobody will discover. So this is why they say we need to ensure that we make these guys who are in power accountable, the guys who got the responsibility, the authority, the guys who are actually the mastermind behind these schemes. How can we go after them? Because in most of the time, unfortunately, these guys are so smart, they are going to implicate the guys in the bottom, the employees, the managers. And when fraud and corruption happen, they say, we are not responsible. We are the senior management. We are the chairman, the board, the CEO. I'm not responsible. These are the guys in the bottom doing corruption. But who give them the approval? Who give them the instructions? This is why we say globally that now, because more and more fraud is done by senior management, by executive management, we are saying we need to hold these individuals accountable for the acts. We need to make sure that they have what we call the fraud triangle. They have the proper integrity to fight fraud. They need to be accountable for their act. We are going to hold them accountable for the fraud happening inside their department. They need to take responsibility of the functions that they are handling, and they need to have the proper authority to ensure they control their departments. So when we are speaking about fraud, what are the three categories of fraud? The three categories of fraud, they are corruption, they are asset misappropriation, and financial statement fraud. So when someone say, yeah, fraud is the same as corruption, I say no. Corruption is only one type of fraud, is not actually, different than fraud. One category is corruption. One category is asset misappropriation. They are actually stealing inventory or cash, or they are manipulating the value of the assets. And one type of fraud is financial statement fraud, which is manipulating the financial information inside the organization. Now, corruption, when we are speaking about it, we need to understand the different categories of corruption. So what are the different categories? Number one, conflict of interest. You are using your position inside the organization to be able to benefit from it. For example, you are an HR manager and you are hiring your cousin, or you are the purchasing manager and you are doing a business with a company that you own or one of your family members they own. So you are creating conflict of interest situation inside the organization. Another way is we call it bribery. You are actually going and paying bribery to someone in government. We call it official bribery. Or someone in businesses, we call it commercial bribery, for you to be able to gain contracts or do certain business dealing. The third one, we call it illegal gratuity, which is illegal tip. You are going and you are tipping someone in the immigration in the airport for him to allow you to enter the country, even you don't have the proper visa. You are going and tipping someone in certain countries. So it's all about tipping. You are tipping individuals for you, maybe to influence their decision, but in most of the time, you are just tipping them just to say thank you. But saying thank you to them is going to influence maybe their future decisions. So you are actually doing illegal tip. You are giving him tip. They say anyone working in government, you are not allowed to give him a tip for doing his job. If you have a visa and you are coming to the country and you are giving him money to say thank you, maybe this is going to influence his future decisions in the future. So this is why no one working, this is only for government, applicable for government. No one working in government should accept a tip for doing their job. Finally, we speak about economic extortion, where if you are actually coming to the country and you have visa, the officer will say, sorry, sir, we will not allow you to come to the country unless you give us some money. They are doing extortion. They are making you pay additional cost for doing legal transactions just because they are in the position of power. So these are the different types of corruption schemes that we can look at it when we are speaking about it inside the organization. But the question here, which one is more important when we are looking at the operations inside the organization? You can write in the chat, what do you think? Which one is more important we need to focus on it? Is it corruption? Is it asset misappropriation? Or is it financial statement fraud? You can write in the chat. Which one do you think we are more concerned about? The issue, the difference between all of them, that when someone is doing financial statement fraud, we have external auditors annually coming checking on the books. So we have certain kind of mechanisms to uncover it. When we are speaking about asset misappropriation, we have our internal audit department. We have our compliance department. We have also different kind of regulators that are coming and checking. But the issue with corruption is hidden. No one will know what's going on. It's the secret door inside the organization. When we look at the ACFE report to the nations, they will tell you that corruption is the most common scheme that happening globally. You can see that corruption for small businesses and for large organizations is considered #1 scheme that's happening in all these organizations. Corruption is massive. And by the way, these are only the actual corruption cases that was reported. They say globally, the amount of bribes paid last year, more than 1.5 trillion. And this is the amount that we know. This is other than the amount that we have no idea about. So this is where we can see corruption is a major issue, is #1 issue facing our organization. Now you say it's facing which organizations? They are facing organizations in all the industry. You can see here in the banking industry, 40% of the cases is related to corruption. So corruption is #1 issue. Also in all the other industry, you can see all here, the red line. Corruption is #1. It's the major issue that's actually hurting our organizations. And all corruption cases will start with a very simple thing. It's a bribery. It's an actually payment to facilitate business. It's a tradition in Malaysia to do it. For us to run a business, we give gifts. It's for us to run business, we have to entertain the client. We have to make sure that they are happy. We have to do marketing. So in that way, we think that gifts and entertainment and all these other methods of actually compensating the customer for doing business with us is part of doing business. Is this acceptable as the norm? Are we allowed to actually do this just because we consider it as part of doing business or not?
Its own traditions. But when the intent is wrong, even norms are not an excuse. It's not a practice. It's not a norm. It's corruption.
It's corruption. It's not the norms. You are not allowed to give gifts. You are not allowed to make the client happy. You are not allowed to entertain the clients and write it as marketing expenses. You need to consider that any payment, any gift, any kind of compensation for the customer for doing business with us is considered an issue. And this is very famous, especially in businesses where we speak about hospitality businesses. Like I remember one time I was in one hotel in Malaysia and I was doing training, and the hotel manager, he said, Iyad, you and your wife are invited to have a dinner on us to tell the general manager of your company, Open Thinking in Dubai, that our facility is great, so you can book us for next time. Is this acceptable? Can I actually take that and go for a dinner that's paid by the hotel for them to influence my decision for me to actually go and do businesses with them? And that's always the question about bribery and corruption. What's going on when we are dealing with these issues inside the organizations? Look what they say. They say the world will not be destroyed by those who are evil, but by those who are watching and do nothing. So if we are having more and more corruption cases in our organization, are we doing anything to stop these corruptions? What kind of controls, what kind of policy, what kind of monitoring we are doing to ensure we catch these cases? That actually corruption will oil the wheels of the commerce. The meaning, if corruption is happening, actually will make the economy much better. We will be able to make more money. Everyone is much better. Why? Look at the thinking. They say, if I need to submit a document to the government and it will take for them 1 month to approve it, if I can pay some money to someone in government and I can make it done in 1 day, that will make business faster. If I want to get a contract and I need tender offer where it will take 6 months to win this contract from a business, but if I pay some money to someone and I can get this contract, I can do it quickly. So they believe corruption can make the economy much better. Everyone will win. So let's see, is this reality? Let's examine the countries all over the world. The countries that they have corruption, compared to the countries they don't have corruption. Which one they have much better commerce, much better economy from global perspective, and see how these businesses are effective globally. So what can we do to stop this corruption from happening? They say for us to stop corruption, we need to take action. Always I speak about action. Why? Because government and businesses, they say the following. They speak about the story of the trees. Do you remember the story of the tree? They say on the tree we have 10 birds and 5 of them decided to fly. How many birds we have on the tree? You can write in the chat how many birds. So again, we have 10 birds on the tree and 5 of them decided to fly. So how many birds we still have on the tree? What do you think? You can write in the chat. Actually, we have how many? We have 10. Why? Because only 5 decided to fly. They didn't fly. And this is what will happen if your management, we decided to implement anti-fraud and anti-bribery policy. We established the controls. Okay, did we implement it? No. Establishing is not enough. Deciding is not enough. We need to implement these processes. We need to make sure they are effective inside our organization so we can stop bribery and corruption from happening. It's not enough for us to establish and have them in our server as policy and procedures. So they say this is why we need to make sure how can we manage conflict of interest. We need to have the proper controls inside the government and inside the organization related to finance. We need to make sure that the election is done properly. We need to make sure that we have the proper check and balances in the government. We need to make sure that any lobbying is regulated properly. And we need to make sure no one is getting preferable treatment, and empowering the citizens. If countries are enacting the proper laws and regulations to protect their citizens, their businesses, their government entities from corruption and bribery, we will be able to improve our economy and advance. So now we need to understand what's happening with all these corruption schemes, how top level executives, they are running away with their corruption. They are running away with their fraud. So let's examine a very interesting case, the case of Wells Fargo in the banking industry. So Wells Fargo, the CEO and the chairman discovered something very interesting. They discovered that Wells Fargo had a big cases of fraud and corruption. But only 5,300 employees doing fraud and corruption. So what do you think, guys? Let me ask you, do you think 5,300 employees doing fraud and corruption for over 5 years, manipulating more than 2 million records is a big issue or small issue or minor? What do you think? Do you think this is a big issue, or do you think this is a minor issue, is not important, is insignificant? What do you think? No. The CEO is not agreeing with you is major issue. The CEO said, this is a minor issue. Is less than 1% of our staff doing it. Only 5,300 employees. And they only manipulating 2 million transactions. This is insignificant. So what we are gonna do? Something very easy. We are gonna fire all the employees who are doing fraud and corruption. We will take strong measure against them. And we are gonna replace them. But we are not gonna fire any of the top management who allowed fraud to happen, who benefited from it. You say, yeah, how he benefited from it? The CEO of Wells Fargo made more than 150 million in compensation during the 5 years where the employees, they manipulated the numbers. So because the investors, they thought the numbers are good, they actually bought more shares and the value of the Wells Fargo went up, and the compensation that the CEO received from that was 150 million. And how much compensation these staff received? Hardly anything. Not only that, Wells Fargo, when we discovered this big fraud that happened in them, they had to pay to the regulators $185 million fine. So the investors, they lost, and the employees, they are fired, but the CEO kept his compensation and he didn't fire any top level or regional directors. Why? Because he said, no. It's not us who is doing the fraud, are the employees. But who pushed the employees to do fraud? Who created culture of pressure? You make the numbers or you are fired. The CEO, the top management. Let's watch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stump, the Wells Fargo vision and values statement, which you frequently cite, says, quote, "We believe in values lived, not phrases memorized. If you want to find out how strong a company's ethics are, don't listen to what its people say, watch what they do." So let's do that. Since this massive years-long scam came to light, you have said repeatedly, quote, "I am accountable." But what have you actually done to hold yourself accountable? Have you resigned as CEO or chairman of Wells Fargo?
The board, I serve at
Have you resigned?
No, I've not.
All right. Have you returned one nickel of the millions of dollars that you were paid while this scam was going on?
Well, first of all, this was by 1% of our people.
That's not my question. My question is about responsibility. Have you returned one nickel of the millions of dollars that you were paid while this scam was going on?
The board will take care of
Have
this.
you returned one nickel of the money you earned while this scam was going on?
And the board will do.
I will take that as a no then. Have you fired a single senior executive? And by that, I don't mean a regional manager or a branch manager. I'm asking about the people who actually led your community banking division or your compliance division.
we've made a change in our regional to lead our regional bank.
I just said, I'm not asking about regional managers. I'm not asking about branch managers. I'm asking if you have fired senior management, the people who actually led community banking division, who oversaw this fraud, or the compliance division that was in charge of making sure that the bank complied with the law.
Carrie Toll said.
Did you fire
No.
any of those people? No. Okay. So you haven't resigned. You haven't returned a single nickel of your personal earnings. You haven't fired a single senior executive. Instead, evidently, your definition of accountable is to push the blame to your low-level employees who don't have the money for a fancy PR firm to defend themselves. It's gutless leadership. In your time as chairman and CEO, Wells has been famous for cross-selling, which is pushing existing customers to open more accounts. Cross-selling is one of the main reasons that Wells has become the most valuable bank in the world. Wells measures cross-selling by the number of different accounts a customer has with Wells. Other big banks average fewer than 3 accounts per customer, but you set the target at 8 accounts. Every customer of Wells should have 8 accounts with the bank. And that's not because you ran the numbers and found that the average customer needed 8 banking accounts. It is because, quote, 8 rhymes with great. This was your rationale right there in your 2010 annual report. Cross-selling isn't about helping customers get what they need. If it was, you wouldn't have to squeeze your employees so hard to make it happen. No, cross-selling is all about pumping up Wells' stock price, isn't it?
No, cross-selling is shorthand for deepening relationships. We only do well.
Let me stop you right there. You say no? No? Here are the transcripts of 12 quarterly earnings calls that you participated in from 2012 to 2014, the 3 full years in which we know this scam was going on. I'd like to submit them for the record, if I may, Mr. Chair. Thank you. These are calls where you personally made your pitch to investors and analysts about why Wells Fargo is a great investment. And in all 12 of these calls, you personally cited Wells Fargo's success at cross-selling retail accounts as one of the main reasons to buy more stock in the company. Let me read you a few quotes that you had. April 2012, quote, "We grew our retail banking cross-sell ratio to a record 5.98 products per household." A year later, April 2013, quote, "We achieved record retail banking cross-sell of 6.1 products per household." April 2014, quote, "We achieved record retail banking cross-sell of 6.17 products per household." The ratio kept going up and up, and it didn't matter whether customers used those accounts or not. And guess what? Wall Street loved it. Here is just a sample of the reports from top analysts in those years, all recommending that people buy Wells Fargo stock, in part because of the strong cross-sell numbers. And I'd like to submit them for the record.
Objections.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when investors saw good cross-sell numbers, they did while this scam was going on. That was very good for you personally, wasn't it, Mr. Stumpf? Do you know how much money, how much value your stock holdings in Wells Fargo gained while this scam was underway?
Well, first of all, it was not a scam, and cross-sell is a way of deepening relationships. When customers
We've been through this, Mr. Stumpf. I asked you a very simple question. Do you know how much the value of your stock went up while this scam was going on?
It's all of my compensation is in our public.
Do you know how much it was?
It's all in the public filing.
Oh, you're right. It is all in the public records because I looked it up. While this scam was going on, you personally held an average of 6.75 million shares of Wells stock. The share price during this time period went up by about $30, which comes out to more than $200 million in gains, all for you personally. And thanks in part to those cross-sell numbers that you talked about on every one of those calls.
Can you imagine? He made more than 200 million from the scheme that he was running, and he created the scheme by pushing the employees to do it. And at the end of the day, he said, I'm not responsible. If you are at the top level inside the organization and you are allowing fraud, corruption to happen, you are going to be responsible because you are not monitoring your staff. You are not implementing the proper controls. They did a global study and they discovered that banks are responsible for the major corruption that happened in the world. Banks, they are responsible. Why? Because corruption and bribery is happening through the financial system. And the question here, why banks are facilitating these schemes? Why banks are accepting the bribes? Why banks are facilitating the illegal payments? And the reason is related to the following. Number one, banks, they have weak controls. They don't have the proper controls to be able to monitor these payments, to be able to flag them in the system. But this is not the major issue. What if we have strong controls? They discover even some banks where they have strong controls, they failed. Why? They say one reason is we don't have enforcement against these executives. The top level executives inside the banks, the executive management who is allowing these loans with the fraudulent bribes, who are allowing these payments, they are actually not accountable. We are not taking proper action and enforcement against these individuals personally. And the other part is related that we are not imposing fines and punishment on them. So we don't have the proper controls inside the organization to stop these schemes. We don't have any kind of enforcement about senior management, and we don't have any punishment against them. So they are going to do fraud over and over. So look what they say. They say this is the first time that the Department of Justice issue a public declaration in a Foreign Corrupt Practice Act case related to Morgan Stanley former managing director and real estate chief. So look what was happening. The managing director of Morgan Stanley in China was giving bribes. Oh my God, that's a big issue. To guys in government and private businesses to facilitate business. So he's saying, okay, why don't you come and have your investment fund with us? And he's bribing executives. So that's a big issue. We can take the Department of Justice in US, they can take major action against Morgan Stanley, where they are going to say, you have to pay massive amount of money as fines. But why the Department of Justice didn't take any action against Morgan Stanley? Look why. They say the Department of Justice cited that the fact that Morgan Stanley first voluntarily disclosed the information. So Morgan Stanley uncovered that there's a corruption happening. They did the proper investigation and they communicated to the government that we have a corruption case that's violating the law of the government, number one. And their investigation showed that the reason for the decision to bring the enforcement action against the organization is not necessary because Morgan Stanley implemented the adequate procedures. Look what they say. They have a policy saying you are not allowed to give gifts. You are not allowed to give bribes. Corruption is not allowed, number one. Number two, they are doing the risk assessment and they assess the risk existing inside their operation. And they implemented the countermeasures by having all the policy and the procedures in place. By controlling the money, no one is allowed to give any money of the organization to facilitate business. By making sure they have the proper record keeping, by making sure they have the proper supervision. And they actually monitoring their employees and making sure employees are not giving any bribes. And they are giving training to the staff and executives saying it's not allowed. Even with all these controls in place, this executive decided to go outside of the system and give bribes from different sources of income to this executive to get the contracts. So because the Department of Justice discovered that Morgan Stanley implemented all the adequate procedures and they are doing all the proper monitoring and they are telling executives you are not allowed to that. Even with that, executive decided to ignore all that and take their own decision in their own hands and pay bribes. The meaning Morgan Stanley is not criminally responsible, it's not legally responsible for the act because they have done everything possible and they investigated the issue and took the proper action against their staff. So for the first time in history, they decided not to make them pay fine or create any enforcement action against them. And this is why it's very important to have the proper adequate procedures, and they are not only established, but they are implemented effectively to make sure that you have done everything from your side as a board director, as executive management, and at the end, in case corruption will happen, which can happen, you can say, okay, I am not personally liable because we have all the adequate procedures in place. This is the important part of it here. So is this happening, like you said, in developed countries, trying to influence developing countries? Of course. Look what Airbus was doing. Airbus, they had to pay 4 billion fine because they were actually paying bribes to actually influence certain countries to buy their aircrafts. Not only that, look at Siemens. Siemens, they actually also had to pay money because they were actually trying to get contracts in certain Asian countries. And they say, look what they say. Germany, imagine until 1999, Germany said it's legal for their companies to pay bribe outside Germany for them to secure contracts as long as they are paying to businesses, not to government. So Siemens can come to Malaysia and they say, okay, we are gonna pay to a telecom operator in Malaysia to secure some kind of contracts. It's legal under Germany law until 1999. So imagine, there is no issue. What about Walmart? Walmart was going to different countries like Mexico, Brazil, China, and India, and they were paying bribe to facilitate business to be able to get certain contracts. And they had to pay fine for that. What about Ericsson? 1.2 billion fine because they were going to certain countries like Vietnam and China, and they were trying to sell their telecommunication solution. So we can see all this fraud happening, even in India. This is a sad reality. In India, when you call 911, or there they call it 108 to actually get an ambulance to go to a hospital, the driver is going to take you to a hospital far away from you. So rather than taking you to a hospital 5 minutes, he's going to take you to a hospital 1 hour away from you because they are going to bribe him for bringing patients. They are making money. Oh my God, you may die on the way just because he's trying to make money, which is really, really, really sad. But what about this guy in the banking sector? He was able to steal 1.8 billion over 7 years by bribing someone working in the bank to give him loans with unsecured assets. If you bribe someone in the bank, disaster can happen. Or these guys who were actually trying to bribe the president of Brazil. The president. Why? Because they were bribing different political parties in Brazil to be able to secure loans at a very good rate from the Brazilian National Development Bank, and they were able to acquire so many organizations. Even they have more than 2.3 billion in wealth. So imagine, they have inside their bank account 2.3 billion. They want more. They went to decide to bribe the officials and the president of Brazil. And what is the main reason for all these bribes? To secure more money and to allow them to export meat all over the world, coming to Asia, coming to Europe, coming to US with salmonella. China, they were getting meat from them with salmonella just because they were paying bribes. So imagine all these bribes and corruption that can happen. All these schemes. But one of the very interesting schemes that we can see what can happen in Malaysia. So this is related to the story of the banker who knew too much. This is the story of Jalil Ibrahim. So the story started like this. Malaysian government created a bank called Bank Bimutra. And the objective of this bank is to facilitate the payment to entrepreneurs in Malaysia who decide to start their own businesses. And the bank was supporting so many entrepreneurs in Malaysia until the bank was making so much money from the oil, the increase of the price of the oil. And they said, what can we do? We need to involve in bigger projects. At that time, Hong Kong market was actually booming. So they said, great, maybe we need to give some money to all this real estate development who are doing projects in Hong Kong. So they decided to open a branch called BMF branch in Hong Kong. And one of the best organizations there at that time was called Carrian Group, owned by George Tan. So they decided to give them loan after loan, and they were so happy because the industry was booming. But suddenly the industry actually crashed. Why? Because there was a bubble in the real estate. So at that time, they noticed something unusual. They noticed that the executives in the BMF branch in Hong Kong, they were giving loans even without proper documentation, even without approval from the head office. So they said something not right happening there. So they decided to send Jalil Ibrahim to go and audit and see exactly what's happening. Jalil Ibrahim went there to do the audit. And after a couple of weeks, Jalil Ibrahim found dead in banana plantation in Hong Kong. Now everyone wondered what happened, why he's dead. The government of Hong Kong came to do an investigation, and they discovered, based on the investigation, that one guy, his name Mak Fun To, he killed him. But when they went back to the office of BMF branch, they discovered that a team from Carrian group came to take a loan. So imagine the team came to take a loan. And when they are coming to take a loan, they said, where is Jalil Ibrahim? Everyone said, we don't know where Jalil Ibrahim. And the police discovered that Jalil Ibrahim was meeting this Mak Fun To in a hotel. And Jalil Ibrahim made a phone call from the hotel to the organization, to the bank. And the bank asked him, listen, Carrian Group, they are coming here to take a loan. And should we accept this loan or not? What do you think? And he's about to answer. Then the line was cut off. And then the bank approved 4 million loan to the Carrian Group. So they say maybe the death of Jalil Ibrahim is related to certain kind of evidence Jalil Ibrahim he got against the executive of BMF branch for facilitating loans to Carrian Group without approval, without the proper documentations. So the government of Hong Kong decided to open a huge investigation against the Carrian Group, and then they discovered that they are running massive scheme, not only against BMF branch, but against actually so many banks globally. And they decided after 17 years of investigation, imagine 17 years of a case going under investigation and with a legal proceeding, to take case against the George Tan, the executive director of Carrian Group. And after all 17 years of investigation and legal proceeding, the guy got a sentence into a prison for a couple of years, and now he's out. Let's end up our session with this video.
So at the end of the day, at the end of that trial, that murder trial, we were left with a body and the murderer, and that was it.
But the murder of Jalil, the banker who knew too much, sparks a nationwide investigation into the misappropriate use of funds by the Carrian Group and its leading players. A court inquiry against George Tan and his associates begins in October 1984. Less than a year after Jalil's murder, the Carrian Group crashes with debts close to $1.2 billion US. But it is not just the Carrian Group that is investigated. Anyone who had dealings with the company and its owner, George Tan, comes under intense scrutiny. The case becomes known around the world as the Carrian case and would go on to be the longest criminal case in Hong Kong judicial history, spanning 17 years at a cost of 210 million Hong Kong dollars.
This case was actually a mammoth case, not just for the Far East, but for the rest of the world, because of the international banks that were involved, and the exposure was US $1 billion by these banks, which included Bank Bumiputra, which included Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, which included Deutsche Bank, which included Barclays. Everybody seems to have exposed themselves in this company because they believed this man.
BMF, Hong Kong's deposit-taking company of Malaysia's Bank of Bumiputra, is among the worst-hit international banks that was involved with Carrian. In a span of 2 years, they are shown to have lent the Carrian Group nearly $600 million US in mostly unsecured loans. Some of the top BMF officials are also investigated by Hong Kong police. Lorraine Osmond, a non-executive director of BMF in Hong Kong, is held responsible for malpractices between the bank and Carrian's loan agreements. Hashem Shamshuddin, the director of BMF, is thought to have received attractive consultancy fees paid into his own company by none other than George Tan. Both are charged with financial corruption. Lorraine and Hashem flee to London following the case. But in 1986, Shamshuddin is arrested and extradited to Hong Kong and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Lorraine Osmond spent 7 years in the English prison system until finally being extradited to Hong Kong, where he serves only 2 months in jail. George Tan is brought to trial twice, in 1986 and 1992. In a case lasting more than 4 years, the charismatic George Tan, leader of the Carrian Empire, finally pleads guilty. He is charged with conspiracy to defraud, and in 1996 is sentenced to 3 years in Stanley Prison.
It was the biggest financial scandal in the Far East. But unfortunately, all the trials that have not been able to establish the actual motive for the murder of Jalal Ibrahim.
It was a massive case of fraud, of criminal breach of trust, of theft of public funds, and as to who murdered Jalil, I think that this remains unanswered and resolved murder.
There are tremendous ramifications to this case, only a small part of which has ever been revealed. And who knows, perhaps in the course of time, we shall learn the whole truth. But at the moment, we certainly do not.
Arus Nui, the wife of Jalil Ibrahim, the unresolved mystery of her husband's murder will always be a painful memory to live with. But she chooses to reflect on her husband's death with a sense of pride.
I can say I'm proud of him because he died of a good cause. The case is considered closed, isn't it? I suppose it's closed. I also do not want to get involved. Things will change.
This is what will happen when you are in the driver's seat, when you are the executive, you are driving your organization to the finish line, and you would like to run at the fastest speed possible. You would like to do it to be able to achieve success. You need to have the seatbelt there. You need to follow the proper controls. You need to make sure you are not going to exceed the speed limit, because at the end of the day, not only they are going to make sure your car is going to actually be seized, they are going to make you responsible. They are going to hold you responsible for the damages happening to the car, for the damages happening to the community, and for the damages that you cause to the organization. The same way the organization is responsible, because you are in the driver's seat, because you are controlling the car, you are the driver, you are going to be accountable if you don't follow the controls. And what is the value of the success that you are going to achieve, or the success that the organization they are going to achieve, if it's based on fraud? There is no value. I rather fail with honor than and succeed with a fraud. Thank you so much. I hope that that was amazing session for you to learn about the recent trend related to anti-corruption, and I hope I will see you next time.